Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining our webinar today. I'm so excited to have special guest speakers, Dr. Daniel and Bethany, who are the founders of Life-Giving Wounds. For the next 20 minutes, they're going to be giving some great insight on adult children preparing for marriage who have had parents that have gone through divorce. And at the end of this webinar, so Bethany and Dr. Daniel are going to be speaking for the next 20 minutes about this topic. And then we hope to have 10 minutes of questions and answers. Right now, everyone's in listen only mode, so I will unmute everyone so we can have open discussions and questions, and Bethany and Dr. Daniel will be able to answer that for you. But since our time is so limited, I'm going to let Bethany and Dr. Daniel take it away and go ahead.
Great, thank you. Thanks, Ashley.
Hello, welcome everybody. Obviously, there's only so much we can cover in 20 minutes, so we'll give our contact information if there are specific questions. There's a lot more material than we're able to get to today. But again, welcome everybody. I'm Dr. Bethany Meola, my wife Bethany. We're co-founders of Life-Giving Wounds Ministry. The mission of Life-Giving Wounds is very simple: to give voice to the pain of adult children divorce, separation, and to help them find deep and lasting spiritual healing in Christ. We're very proud we're now in 12 dioceses and 1 college campus, and our presentation today is based on our own experience, our lived experience, as well as accompanying over 1,000 adult children divorced through our program since 2015, and also my research as a PhD, I was going to say candidate now, completed my PhD as part of my studies. So it's a little bit where we're coming from. A little bit more about our ministry. If you want to look us up, we do retreats and support groups. We have a library of resources online and print, including a research page. Some of the statistics we'll cite today you can find on our website. We establish chapters around the country for local support. We provide leader training, consultations, things like this, speaking engagements. And we do online outreach and community. And we're always innovating to grow our ministry.
So we want to talk a little bit about both our audience, our general audience for our ministry, and then the audience for today's webinar, as well as our goal for this webinar. So first, in our ministry overall, the people that we serve are adult children of divorce or separation. And by that, we mean any man or woman over 18 whose parents are no longer together. So that includes people whose parents married and later divorced. It also includes people whose parents never married but later split up, a cohabitation dissolution, or never really a relationship to begin with. It includes people whose parents received a declaration of nullity or not. It includes people whose parents split up before they were born or separated later in their marriage. We see the whole range. So the common factor that we're addressing is anyone who has lost the love of their parents together. And our ministry speaks to the common wounds that rupture causes in the lives of children well into adulthood, and the path to healing that our church and Jesus so generously give us. We also do see people whose parents are technically still married, but live as if they're not. There's a lot of dysfunction in the family. Just one example, families impacted seriously by alcoholism. We have those people come to our ministry as well. For today's webinar, as you probably can tell, we're focusing on a subgroup of this broader audience. So we'll be talking specifically about engaged couples where one or both of them are adult children of divorce or separation. And the topic we're going to zero in on is how to help these engaged couples best prepare for success in marriage, given the particular wounds and views of marriage that they may be carrying into their own marriage.
Why this matters, just really quickly, and again, we have a lot of statistics on our website. Less than half of children today are going to grow up with both of their parents continuously married until their 18th birthday. Let that sink in. Less than half. Okay, so this is a new record for the United States and really belies a unique situation that we're confronting of an unprecedented level of relational brokenness that people are bringing into marriage. The second point is adult children divorce separation as a group are the most at risk for divorce themselves. Studies range from at the lowest, they're 40% more likely to divorce themselves to as high as 200%. So if there's one group that we really need to hone in on if we want to strengthen marriage and family. It's this group. And finally, it's because Christ cares about it. I mean, he teaches very strongly about the truth of marriage in Matthew 19, about the indissolubility, the permanence of it, the faithfulness of it, the need to have love that lasts. And I think he has us children in mind when he says that, because very beautifully, right after his strongest teaching on marriage and divorce in Matthew 19, he pivots immediately to the children. And he says, let the children come to me, almost as if he had us in mind the entire time. So I'd like to say Christ cares deeply about this group, and so should you.
And also, just to mention, when it comes to statistics, adult children of divorce are also more likely not to get married. They're more likely to cohabitate and not enter into a time of committed relationship. So in our broader ministry, we meet a lot of singles or people who are dating that have a lot of fears about marriage itself. So we want you to keep in mind that by the time couples show up at marriage prep, they may possibly have overcome a significant fear just to get there. And especially with the overall marriage rate at a historic low right now, this factor is something to be aware of, even if your particular role is helping those couples who have said yes to marriage. So we want to go through 5 examples, 5 wounds that an adult child of divorce who is engaged may be bringing into their marriage. We want to talk about those wounds, and then we want to talk about some ways to address it. A few disclaimers. This is nowhere near an exhaustive list. We have a lot more content through our own ministry about relationships. We have a lot more content about wounds that children of divorce experience. The second disclaimer is that what we're saying here is directed at adult children of divorce, but of course, we all experience woundedness in our lives and in our families. Those fiancés and spouses who do not come from a background of divorce or separation can really bless their marriage by healing from their own wounds, since we all have wounds, and also by being aware of their beloved's different experience. We've experienced this through our own relationship. My parents are still together, Dan's are not, they are divorced. But we have found healing walking through that journey with and walking with each other, and finding healing through our sacrament through each other. So just something to keep in mind. The first wound that we want to talk about is the lack of a lived example of marriage lasting for life. So this is kind of by definition, an adult child of divorce or separation has experienced in their family of origin either the lack of marriage altogether or a marriage that has broken apart. Most of them have also experienced reconfigurings of their one or both parents with new relationships, new family structures that also may break and reconfigure at some point. And just to stress the point that these broken, complicated structures, it's not like that ends, when the divorce happens. Rather, that lasts throughout life, barring the beautiful witness of reconciliation. So for couples that come from that background, this brings added challenges to relate to either their own parents and any step parents or their in-laws, and just extra complication of those family branches. Couples from this background, they have no experiential roadmap that they've witnessed of how to get through difficulties without calling it quits, of how to parent together as a team, of how to handle conflict in a healthy way, and so forth. As an example, one of our volunteer leaders, she shared with us that when she was a young girl, her picture of her future was as a single mom. She literally could not envision herself married and doing family and parenting as a team because that was so foreign from her experience. So a few ways to address this lack of lived example. The first, and we'll be mentioning this a lot, is witness. Witness of people who have gone through that pain of a broken family and have found healing and have strong marriages today. We really want to encourage you to find those witnesses, to ask the volunteers. We're often surprised when leaders don't even realize that some of their volunteers have that background. Make a point to ask about that and encourage integrating those experiences into the witness talks. The second point is mentors, and that can be people who are assigned to a couple or people from their own lives, just having that lived example of marriages that endure for life. For us, and especially for Dan, that was his grandparents who witnessed to a lifelong marriage till the very end of their lives. Third is, we call it over-explaining, just remembering that not everyone comes to marriage prep with the same built-in knowledge about forgiveness or respectful communication or so much more that people who have the blessing of growing up in a decently happy and functional home absorb as they're getting into their own marriages. Finally, teaching about healthy boundaries with family members for those situations where there's a lot of dysfunction going on in the extended family. Teaching couples to prioritize their own vocation when they get married. That's the center, that's their world, that's their vocation that they need to prioritize.
The second wound that we see very often is distorted expectations. Now, these can sometimes be conscious, they can sometimes be unconscious. We kind of break them up into two big categories, cynicism and romanticism. And there's a lot of different variations of cynicism. Of course, the fear that they're not capable of marriage, they feel like they're afraid that they're not worthy of love. They know it's going to be hard, so they might settle for very low bars of just not getting divorced, might have settled for very unhealthy relationships, for instance, just to escape the chaos of the home. And there can be all sorts of types of cynicism where the person can sort of just hold back their heart from fully going into marriage. And the other flip side of it is romanticism, where it treats the other person as a savior. Almost they're going to answer all my needs, all the problems I have, undo the unhealthy dynamics for my home, etc. And they don't have their priorities correct. That we need to find first fulfillment in God, and then through that, our spouse, and then others. For instance, we have a happily married friend who's stressed, for example, and this kind of shows how romanticism and cynicism can go hand in hand. You can hold both at the same time. For instance, every time there's a conflict that comes up, she would think, because marriages were not supposed to have conflicts, that her marriage was doomed. She married the wrong person, that she thought conflict spelled disaster, because again, she had this very romantic view of marriage being close to perfection. And that's another thing that can kind of come up in this romantic view of this unrealistic perfectionism towards oneself and towards others. So again, just very briefly kind of jumping into these wide categories, and we can break them down a lot more during Q&A, what this might concretely mean. But in response to this, we need the realistic expectations that the Bible gives us about marriage. That marriage is for joy, but it's also for sanctification. So against the cynic view, we need to stress joy, healing, love can come through a good relationship. But against the romantic view, this requires work. We've had to work at our marriage. This hasn't been easy. Self-sacrifice. Marriage isn't just for our happiness. It's also for self-sacrificial love, etc. So we sort of say like a joy and growth mindset is kind of needed to counter this. Also, dealing with shame. A lot of what's driving these false expectations, a lot of these wounds, is this deep-seated unworthiness of love, feeling that they can love. So we need to get at those roots that are fueling these expectations. It's one thing to talk about expectations, that's important. We also need to get at the root for what's driving these distorted expectations. Also, just related to this too, discernment. They need help with what does good discernment look like. We get asked very frequently, what's a red flag? What's a yellow flag? What's a green flag? They need very clear principles of discernment. And again, that's something that can help heal distorted expectations.
So the third wound we want to talk about is something that we call unhealthy self-protective behaviors. We all know that the church teaches us the truth that marriage is a total self-gift of spouses to each other. But for a lot of adult children of divorce, that concept is terrifying. The idea of being totally open and receptive to another person has often led for them in the past to pain, betrayal, and rejection. It doesn't feel like a safe thing to do, and there can be a gut level aversion to that type of intimacy. How this looks, some examples of what we call self-protective, unhealthy self-protective behavior. There's the classic example of a prenuptial agreement or always keeping separate checking accounts, protecting yourself if your relationship doesn't work out. There can be a resisting of vulnerability with the other that marriages need to thrive. needing to always be the doer or the protector, feeling really uncomfortable being dependent or relying on the other person. It can look like all sorts of addictive behavior that people turn to, in part because the depth of that truly self-giving relationship is just too scary and risky. And finally, it can look like codependency. So being obsessed with the other person's needs and feelings, never wanting to rock the boat, just that deep fear that the other person will reject you if you don't do the right thing always. A couple ways that this can be addressed. Again, the importance of witness. We'll just say that again and again. Couples talking about this, talking about the fears of self-giving that they might have had and how they overcame that through Christ. Growing in self-awareness, a lot of times we have seen it's just a huge step to see and understand what core reasons are at play for why we act in certain ways, why we hold ourselves back. And that can also grow compassion from the other person too. Third, countering any self-protective behaviors that we see in ourselves with virtue. So for example, working on the courage to open one's heart to one's beloved, working on the humility to recognize our dependence on the other. And then finally, similar to the last topic, giving couples a holistic vision of marriage where openness and vulnerability lead to strength and joy, not pain and betrayal.
The fourth wound we hear a lot about is fears about parenting. This was one of the main findings of Judith Wallerstein's famous work, The Unexpected Legacy of Divorce, is that adult children in divorce are more likely not to want to have children, and they're also more likely to doubt their capacity to be a good parent. So the reasons were not because of a career or finances, or even rejecting church's teaching about being open to life. Rather, it was this relational wound that they had, that they didn't want, if they felt any hint of their relationship faltering, they didn't want their children to go through the same thing that they experienced. So we need to address this, just again, acknowledge these fears and wounds compassionately, and try to heal these underlying wounds. So again, talk about church teaching, but we have to also heal the unhealed wounds that are driving a lot of these fears to avoid parenting. This is where we need witness. They do need skills. They feel like a lot of them don't have skills about the priorities in parenting, how to discipline, how to handle conflict. Again, talking about those things can increase their confidence and trust to have a plan that they can do this, that they can be a good parent. And just again, a lot of encouragement that they're not doomed to repeat their parents' mistakes. And then finally, this has to be healed in the relationship. There needs to be vulnerability, discussing these fears out loud, asking about how their family of origin wounds has affected their expectations of parenting, their trust, etc. So again, we need to have a holistic view of all these topics and integrate healing into every single one of these topics we're talking about.
We just put on a separate slide because this is such a takeaway point that we always stressed to people, that you are not doomed to repeat your parents' mistakes. That can be a really deep-seated fear that then impacts a lot of relationship choices and challenges.
You're not your parents. You're an unrepeatable gift.
So the fifth fear or wound we want to talk about is the fear of conflict. Conflict can be very scary to a lot of adult children of divorce. In their families, conflict may have resulted in violence and abuse. Or on the flip side, maybe they never saw their parents engage in conflict, never saw them resolve anything. Everything may have happened in silence behind closed doors until the day their parents announced that they were getting a divorce. Fundamentally, for adult children of divorce, their parents' conflict at some point became unreconcilable. And that fear can creep in every time a conflict happens, no matter how small. It can result in avoiding issues. It's too scary to go there, and then maybe massive blowups later when it just becomes unsurmountable. Or it can be a general anxiety about every little conflict, which does not lead to a very ongoing happy marriage. A few ways to address this fear, again, acknowledging those deep heart level wounds that can be at play here. Conflict skills are crucial, learning how to do conflict well, but it's so essential to see and address whatever fears and wounds are at play with how we're relating to conflict. Giving encouragement, and this can come through witness, to engage in conflict, the trust that having an argument is not going to doom their marriage, and the belief that conflict can actually be a blessing for the growth of their marriage. And finally, retraining reactions to conflict and learning new skills. That could be something that's worked on in therapy, that could be it, or with a mentor couple. Growing in self-awareness and substituting new reactions for what they saw growing up. It takes time, but it's certainly possible.
Just some final thoughts. Addressing unawareness. There's a lot of unawareness of how our past is affecting our present. Just in general, there's a lot of shame to admit that we have wounds. There's a lot of shame. Sometimes adult children divorced feel less than their intact peers. They feel like they're going to be judged if they bring this up. Or maybe on the flip side, they have tried to bring it up, but they've had their pain minimized in the past or spiritually bypassed quickly to some spiritual truth without doing the hard work of healing the wounds. And so to counter this unawareness gap, or awareness gap, sorry, I shouldn't say it that way. We need stories. So many times people come on our retreats and discover, I thought there was 1 or 2 things affecting me. Oh my goodness, after hearing this person's story and that person's story, I realized I've been a lot more affected than I realized. So again, we need stories, we need witnesses. But then the other thing is we need to do a better job, I think, in the church of integrating healing into discipleship. It's not just for the adult child divorce, it's everybody needs to heal. As I like to remind people, the root of salvation comes from the word sozo, which means healing. This healing needs to be integrated into our discipleship, which means needs to be integrated in every single topic we talk about during Marriage Book. Second point is we need to provide other opportunities for healing. Specifically, we have here in mind our ministry, counseling resources, mental health resources, again, mentor couples, things like that. Because again, seeing that live marriage up front, close and personal, I mean, there's no substitute. Again, what Bethany said was so many of our participants come to us like, I don't know what a good marriage looks like. I've never, ever seen it. So please help me. And they're afraid to ask. So we need to provide ample opportunities for healing and collaboration with professional counseling.
So as a final note of hope to end on, we want to leave you with this. We think that adult children of divorce who are engaged, who are married, have a secret superpower. We've seen this again and again with the people that we work with. So many adult children of divorce have an incredible passion for lasting marriage because of what they've been through. They've seen what happens when marriages don't work out. And if they themselves can receive the healing that they need, they can be a tremendous witness to marriage. They don't take it for granted. They're often very intentional about their relationships, and they know so deep down what a gift it is for them and their children to have a stable marriage and a stable home. I know that we feel that that's been one of the mysterious gifts to come out of the suffering of a broken home. So we emphasize that to give hope, because we never want anyone who has experienced a wound to feel like that's it, that's who they are, they're a victim, or there's nothing that they can do about it. We want to see every wound as a lesson for love, that we're not just victims, but with Christ, we can discover abundant healing and in turn discover a mission and be witnesses for others of lifelong marriage with great joy. So that is the end of our presentation. As Ashley said, feel free to reach out with us. Our emails are up here, and we're very easy to find at our website, lifegivingwounds.org. I believe we will now open it for questions. Go ahead, whatever.
Yeah, thank you so much. That was incredibly insightful in just a short amount of time. So thank you, thank you, thank you. So I am going to unmute everyone, and basically what that will do is give you access to unmute yourself. So if you do want to ask a question, please just feel free to unmute yourself and go ahead. And there's some great questions in the chat too, if you need me to read it out loud.
Get rid of the background.
Sometimes it takes a little bit.
Where do you want us to begin with the chat? We can't see the audience, so I don't know if it's something on our end that we have to do different.
Yeah. So one of the questions would be, what could you recommend for a couple that already has children and starting a new relationship that would lead to new marriage, but the children from a previous marriage are being shared custody with their other spouse? Like, how could children be transition to an accepting new relationship?
Well, I would just say this is the wrong question to ask to start with. It's not
Okay.
about how the children can transition to accept the new relationship, as it's first of all allowing them to grieve their losses and to help them heal, and then later on to help them transition, so to speak. Because a lot of times, a lot of us feel that there was a lot of quick, forced intimacy. There's a lot of this language in the literature of forced intimacy, forced relationships very quickly. They never get to process what the heck is going on. And they need some space and they need some unique time with just their biological parents and to honor those special relationships. So I would just say the first thing always is how can we help our children heal and grieve the losses, to listen to them, what do they need, before then asking, okay, how can I help them transition to this new family? So that would be the first thing I'd say.
I would just add, and this hopefully is a little bit more of a global point too, but for anyone who is in pastoral ministry but is not themselves an adult child of divorce, it's really, really essential to read voices and hear voices from adult children of divorce. And that's something that thankfully is so much more available today. On our website, we have a list of resources. One I'll just verbally mention is Primal Loss by Layla Miller, which is a collection of testimonies. It's a hard book to read because it's very raw, but that needs to be the go-to source when thinking about, and it's not to say everyone's experience is the same, because it's not, but to go to the people who've been through it themselves to best understand what it's like.
Yeah, and it just, I mean, there's so much I can say too. Like, also recognize that the new relationship doesn't get rid of all their losses. Like, they still have this tremendous loss of losing the love of their parents together. No matter how much you individually love them, or a new relationship loves them. So we need to be acknowledging these losses that this relationship cannot make up for, and the need to develop Christ relationship with Christ. And again, there's so much.
Probably go for another question though.
Yeah. Anyways, let's go on to the next question. But please learn about the wounds. Please learn about the wounds, because a lot of people assume they know what it means to be a child of divorce, but they haven't yet stepped into their shoes. Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's awesome. That's awesome. That was all the questions that were written in the chat. If anyone wants to unmute themselves and ask a live question, we do have a few minutes left. If not, if you want to pull a question from the registration list, you most certainly can.
Go for it. Yeah, we have one.
Great.
Oh, okay. So the question, most broadly, somebody had asked, if you're in it, you're engaged, you're looking to your wedding day, your parents are split up, maybe they're not on good terms with each other, one of them isn't happy about the other one being there, and so forth. Just how to deal with that, and that certainly is something that is good to have in mind as pastoral ministers, because there can be some pretty serious emotional challenges coming up to the wedding day. If you're coming from a broken home, it's possible your parents haven't seen each other for years and years and years. So we wanted to address that.
Yeah, I mean, the first thing, again, we had this come up in our own marriage too. Again, the first time my parents are seeing each other in a number of years, there's a lot of emotions, there's a lot of feelings and a lot of worries. And the first thing I want to say is prioritize first your own relationship and the sacrament. So we can get really sucked into trying to please everybody else at the wedding, and how are they going to react to this or that person there, and what's mom going to say about this and what dad's going to say. And I would just say, you can do a little bit of that. That's not your job. Like, your job is not to please everybody or even your parents, right? This day is about you, Christ in you. That's okay to prioritize your marriage and your relationship with your spouse that day. And I would just keep encouraging you to keep focusing on that. You can't control other people's feelings and things like that. And also, you do have a right, if you want both parents at your wedding, to have both of your parents there. And that's okay, even if that means difficulties for one or for the other that they have to work through. Again, it's not your job to do that work. You're the child of both. You can have both be present. And the other thing I would say is, like, we had a lot of boundary violations, but try to draw good boundaries. If there are certain things that really bother you, you can try to have those conversations, but again, you're not in control of that completely. Like, we had put down a few boundaries in place for our parents, and they still, at least one of them, disregarded them. And what I just did is I just kept focusing on my wife and the sacrament. I can't control that. I try to spend most of my time preparing well for that, focusing on that, and focusing less on the drama that I can't control. And again, Christ wants us, that's not selfish. He wants us to focus and prioritize our relationship first before our in-laws. And this is an important thing for boundaries, but also going forward in the marriage. God's first, but then your own relationship, and then the in-laws. The in-laws don't come ahead of your own good of your own relationship. And that's good, by the way, for your in-laws too, because it does nobody any good to invert that order. So it's just something to think about. We could give a lot more practical advice if we knew more about it.
But awesome.
And I would just add too, from a perspective of thinking, if you're somebody working with engaged couples, absolutely ask about this. Ask about, on your wedding day, like, how's that going to go? Is there anything from your family that's going to be a challenge? Can I pray for that? Is there anything that I can do? Give that advice that Dan gave to help calm the nerves. And just, again, have that awareness that it's, given the prevalence of how many families have split up, it's very likely that many of the couples that people are working with in marriage prep have this in their background, and not to assume that the wedding day is going to arrive and they're completely happy and at peace with every member of their family that's there with them. But being upfront and asking those questions can be really great for the couple, because they can feel nervous about bringing it up or feel like, oh my gosh, I have so much baggage that I'm bringing or whatever. So on the pastoral ministry side, creating that space and that openness and that compassion for that extra challenge that they may have to face on their wedding day.
Awesome.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Yes. Last Sunday, I met a case, and the case is the father came and told me just to call the two boys so that I can give them a counseling. And the counseling is, already they are divorced, and the court gave an order that they should have a responsibility of taking care of the children. The father will come to see the children, and the children will be with the mother. Now the mother tells the children, you should not speak with your dad anymore, neither accept any gift. Now the father came to me and he told me, I go and get those children and I give them advice that they should be listening to their parent, to their father, to their dad now. But I found it is somehow awkward, because here the mother is not here, and she's the one who is telling the children, don't now from today speak with your dad. How do you deal with that case?
Okay, I didn't follow the whole custody thing. What?
I think my understanding is where it's a scenario where the mom is saying to the kids to have no more contact with their father,
Exactly.
which we certainly have. Yeah, which we certainly have found. I mean, a lot of it depends on the age of the kids. Certainly, they have more control over their time and their relationships the older that they get. I mean, I think fundamentally, it really, situations like that are so sad because they miss that reality that the child is always going to have that mother and father, period. Just whatever the parents do to distance themselves from each other, kids can't do that. We're the unity in one flesh of our parents. We see our parents when we look in the mirror. It's so much a part of our identity. Certainly there are cases where, for safety reasons, children need to have that distance from their parents. That's something to carefully discern. But to ask for that, absent a serious reason, is that's harmful to the child's identity, because we want to be known by both of our mother and our father.
No.
Yeah.
All right.
Amen. Outside of safety reasons, we need to have a relationship with both. And so that's incredibly tragic. And I would even say borderline emotionally abusive to just say that. And then because you create a situation in the kid where it's like every time I want to talk to the father, I feel incredibly guilty. They shouldn't feel guilty about that. So that's why, like, it's borderline emotional abuse too. So there's just a lot of problems with that unless there's a serious safety reason because of abuse.
All right. Thank you.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Bethany and Dan. You're amazing and your ministry is so amazing. And I really appreciate this webinar and you taking time out of your busy schedule to really just give us some beautiful insight on this important topic. Again, you can contact Bethany and Dan through an email address and of course, go to their website of Life Giving Wounds. But again, thank you so much for your time and thank you all for who attended today. And this webinar was recorded, so we will send it out to you. So if you want to go through Bethany and Dan's slides again, you most certainly can in that recorded webinar. Again, thank you so much, Bethany and Dan, and have a great rest of your day.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you,
Thanks, Ashley.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.